Thank you for tuning in today and watching Lincoln Stories with Sony. On today's show, we have a guest that is a coworker and a good friend of mine. His name is TJ McDowell. I'm excited to introduce you to him and have him explain and tell his stories of why he is here in Lincoln and what it is about our city that he loves so much. TJ, thank you for coming in today and joining us on the show. I'm super excited to be able to talk with you and learn a little bit more about you and your achievements and the passion that you have here to be at the city.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation.
Yes. After working with you for some time, which is a very short amount of time, I've learned that you are pretty impeccable with our community and have really grown to learn that you've done a lot for our community in many aspects. I'd like to know a little bit more about that and what it is that really pushes you to be here.
Yeah. Well, first, I'm from Lincoln. I'm born and raised in Lincoln. Lincoln's home. It's the only place I've ever lived. So I'm a product of Lincoln, and I'm very proud of that fact. And so I love Lincoln, and so my goal and my passion has always been to help make Lincoln better, to help make it a better place for all of its residents. And so I grew up at 3129 Dudley. I'm a very proud Hartley Hornet, color Cougar, and Lincoln High Link, class of 1990. And then I did my college at Nebraska Wesleyan University, and then I did a graduate degree at University of Nebraska-Lincoln.
And what is it that you studied over at the university? What's your degree in?
So my undergraduate degree is in sociology with minors in women's studies and American minorities, and then my master's degree is in education.
Oh, very nice. So I've also recalled that you were the director of the Lighthouse as well.
Yes.
What
Yes.
was your experience with that?
So I was very fortunate. While I was at Nebraska Wesleyan, one of my professors said, I have a job for you this summer. So I went to Nebraska Wesleyan my first year from 90 to 91. In the summer of 1991, I was looking for a job. And my psychology professor, Dr. Bill McDowell, said he was on the board of Lighthouse and it had just opened in June of the previous year. So it opened in June of 1990. I started working there in May of 1991. And it was an incredible experience. Everything I've done professionally is a result of that experience there. Working with young people, the administrative skills, all of that was really, I developed those skills at the Lighthouse. And working with a very diverse bunch of young people who are now part of my extended family, young people from all over the United States, from all over the world. And so it was just a great experience working and hearing the stories of young people who were moving from Iraq or Afghanistan or Bosnia, and hearing their stories and hearing their family stories and helping to understand what they had experienced really gave me the push to do the work that I've been doing my whole career.
Oh, wow. It was probably very fulfilling and enrichful in a sense,
Absolutely.
especially to learn all that from youth,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. What else have you been able to do that pushed you in that direction from that experience?
Well, a big part of what pushed me is, so my parents got married in 1971. My dad is black and my mom is white. My dad passed away in April, but he was 90 years old when he passed, and he was from rural Mississippi. And so as a black man in rural Mississippi, things were tough. He grew up in that time period where it was separate drinking fountains, separate schools. If he was on the sidewalk and a white man was coming, he'd have to get off the sidewalk and go to the other side of the street. He grew up in a time and in a place where lynchings happened frequently. And so he actually was sent away from his home when he was in his teenage years because he had made a threat to a white neighbor. And his mom was really afraid he would be lynched. So he made the threat to a white neighbor that night he was 2.5 hours away. And he didn't go back to his home for quite some time. And my mom's white, and she's from Hebron, Nebraska. And so my parents got married in 1971. Until 1967, it was illegal for blacks and whites to marry. In 16 southern countries, states, I think it was illegal in Nebraska until 1963. So my parents got married in 71, and although the law had changed, not everybody was real excited about blacks and whites marrying, including my mother's parents, who lived in the same city, who lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, until I was in my 20s, but I never met them. So I grew up in the same town with my biological maternal grandparents and never met them. And so that experience helped me to come to understand about this idea of prejudice and discrimination and how we can treat each other based on the color of our skin or some other some other factor of our identity. And I, I, I used to tell this story about my not meeting my grandparents, and I used to think that story was about their prejudice. Later, as I got older, I learned that as a result of that experience, I had a really strong prejudice against older white people who could be my grandparents. And it came from this idea of fear in many respects, because and this is what we do with prejudice and stereotypes. We take the example or the experience with a limited representative of a particular group, and then we take that experience and we say, everybody in that group thinks that way or acts that way or is that way. And that's what I did. I decided in my mind all older white people were prejudiced against black people. And when I was at Nebraska Wesleyan, I got a scholarship from a 84-year-old white woman who was a fabulous, feisty, she had been an educator. I was planning to be an educator. And we had lunch and to get to know each other, and we hit it off, right off the bat. So I continued to go over and have lunch with her. And after a while, I told her how afraid I was to meet her because of my experience with my grandparents. And she said, that was foolishness. And then she took me around, and then she said, I'll be your grandmother. And she walked me around the dining hall at Gateway Manor and introduced me to her friends as her grandson. And so at that moment, that prejudice I had about all older white people, I realized wasn't true. And so that was such a pivotal moment in my life, especially as I look back on it and reflect on it. And I've tried to use that story and use that experience to talk to people about prejudice and how it comes and how we all have it. And so part of our challenge is to examine those prejudices. And so that experience really then, coupled with my experience with youth, was the catalyst or the reason why this work is so important to me, to make sure that everybody in our community feels like they belong, feels like they're included, and feels like they can be their fully authentic self.
Right. It's really powerful. It is very powerful. I mean, to think that when you said, it wasn't that long ago, where it was illegal to have black and white families marry into each other, and that only being less than 100 years ago, less than 50 years ago. But how it affects you in many ways. And then to have that experience with the lady that had given you the scholarship. Can I ask you, what was her name?
Her name was Doris Stice.
Doris Stice. That's wonderful.
Yeah, she was pretty phenomenal person.
Yes, it made a huge impact.
Huge impact.
And to also have that be able to impact you to be able to help other students. Yeah. It's a cycle. It's a large cycle that continues to this day.
Yeah.
So what is it now that you're doing that also involves that kind of message?
Yeah, I think all of my work, from Lighthouse, and I worked at the Community Health Endowment, at Lincoln Action Program, at Lincoln Public Schools, at Nebraska Wesleyan, at the university. All of those positions, the one thing that's remained the same is that I wanted to work on behalf of young people so that they could reach their full potential, and that the barriers of prejudice and stereotypes and discrimination would be addressed so that they wouldn't have to overcome that to be successful. And that I want everybody to understand that our prejudices, our stereotypes, are barriers to us having relationships. If I only see you as a stereotype I have about your whatever group you belong to, I don't really see you. And not seeing you is a barrier to you and I having a relationship. And so I think everything in life really comes down to relationships. I mean, I think everything in life comes down to our ability to form relationships with people. And the ability to form relationships with people who are different than us is really, I think, and as we look in our world today, it's an absolutely critical, essential skill. To be able to communicate, collaborate, solve problems with people who don't look like us, who don't worship God like us, who don't love like we do. It's an absolutely essential skill to be successful in this day and age. Yes. I believe. Because I believe that when you look at the world today, a lot of the major issues and the major challenges that we see are a result of people not being comfortable with differences.
Right. I'd have to agree with that as well. I think the relationship aspect and the friendship and the love and the care for yourself and for each other are really important. Yeah. And then to be able to open up and allow that to prosper with each individual that you're with throughout the day, I think is magnificent.
And it's one of the reasons why I love Lincoln, is in my experience in Lincoln, I've been here 50 years, in my educational experience, in my work, and and where I've lived, I've had the opportunity to interact with some very diverse people who weren't like me, but who've made my life better, who've enriched my life. And I think that's what's so great about Lincoln, and why I think this work is so important. There's a place for everybody. And because I love Lincoln, I want to make it even better. And so no matter what I'm doing in terms of my professional role, I'm always going to be trying to do that.
Right. That's incredible.
Yeah.
So what else is it in your life that you really enjoy and like doing besides all this good work with our community and sharing the great message that you do? What does TJ do for fun here in Lincoln?
Well, I'm fortunate. I was recently got married, and I have 2 kids, and I actually have 3 grandkids.
Yay.
And so my family is very important to me. My mom is here in Lincoln still, and I'm very fortunate because I grew up in Lincoln. So the other thing about why I'm a Lincolnite, I'm a homeboy, is because my roots are so deep here. Like I have friends here, and then I have friends who've gone other places, but I have friends, I have networks here that just very comfortable to me, and that are great resources to me. So I have a network of friends and colleagues that I can spend time with. And so that family and just, I love going to community events. And so I think Lincoln's just a great place. And as we become more diverse, I think it's an opportunity for us to be the model for how diversity, equity, inclusion can be embedded throughout the city.
Yes.
In every aspect, in every sector.
Yes, and it takes a small army to be able to build a strong front.
Yeah.
And the little bit that everyone can touch, will be able to have a ripple effect to let everyone know that this is Lincoln, and we hope to be and become even more inclusive and equal for everybody.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that for me, and because of my life story, is so I understand what it's like to feel not included because of my grandparents, but then I understand what it's like to be honest about my prejudice. And so I see how you can be both, how both those things can exist. And so I've tried to example and to model and I'm always honest when I do my presentations. I often talk about my prejudice to say, here, this is this is work we all need to do. And I think we all bring some diversity to the table. Oftentimes when we talk about diversity, we only label it as a racial issue and it's a black-white issue, but diversity is really all the ways in which our identities are different, and the richness that brings. And so taking some of the nuance, and diversity is not a scary word, and so letting people know that we all bring diversity to the table. And then also we all have prejudices that we have to be aware of and to examine and to challenge and confront. And so it's work that we're all, there's a role and for all of us in this work. There's something for us all to do. And all that really comes out of this incredible story I've been able to have because I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. And because I grew up in a home where I had a black father and a white mother, and all the richness and the beauty of that, and also the challenges that came from that. But I wouldn't change anything about what my experiences growing up, where I'm at today. I've been so fortunate that Lincoln has a great educational system. It's a safe community. It's got great resources in terms of our parks and our libraries, all the stuff that we talk about here in the city. And that it's given me so many opportunities to do things that at this point in my life, I never would have guessed I'd had the opportunity to do as a young person. And so, and I've been very fortunate that in some ways I've been able to give back to every aspect of the city, of the community that gave to me. I was a director of the Malone Center, and I had played basketball when I was in high school on a team at Malone Center. I worked at Lincoln Public Schools. I worked at Nebraska Wesleyan and at the university. And then I had this opportunity in this position to work on behalf of my city that I love so much. And so I've been very, very fortunate to have called Lincoln home my entire life.
That's great. You know, you have a pretty impressive experience in helping with the community and just pushing and educating and showing folks that it is okay to be different, and that diversity isn't really a huge challenge.
No.
Everyone does bring diversity to the table. And I think sometimes it takes people to see things like this or meet people like you, whether if it's for long term or for a short term, to make those impactful things in their lives that, you know, that they'll remember forever.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty sure there's like you said, you had some extended students still from the Lighthouse that you still keep in touch with.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
you know, so I also am the same way. There's certain people in my life that I still keep in touch with because they do make that huge impact.
Yeah. Well, and the idea of our stories are so powerful. Our stories are so meaningful, and when we share our stories, it gives other people insight to a lived experience that maybe they're not familiar with. And that lived experience and hearing that personal story helps foster understanding. And I think that's how we move forward, is we just have to keep sharing our stories with each other and listening to each other's stories and learning from those stories and seeing the richness and the diversity that exists in our community, which is such a beautiful thing.
Yes, Lincoln has so many different families and cultures and diversity and languages that's spoken. And being able to be aware of those things, it's so fulfilling and richful in a sense where, you know, people may not even know that that's here.
Yeah, and it's possible in Lincoln and to isolate yourself and not take advantage of and avail yourself to all that diversity. But this last weekend, my wife and I were talking about, we went to the Welcome Week event on Friday night at the Hub, where we heard really impactful stories. Then on Saturday, we went and spent the afternoon at the Latino Festival and shared that culture and that food and that rich experience. And so there's the opportunity here, but not everybody takes advantage of it. Not everybody avails themselves to it. And so that's other opportunities all the time that come up that we can partake in this community.
Right. Well, hopefully this is an avenue where people can tune in and watch and see the different stories of Lincolnites here in Lincoln.
Yeah.
You know, I really appreciate you being here and taking that opportunity and time to share your story. I couldn't agree with you more. We tend to forget that, you know, we're always on our phones and emailing and social media, and interactions like this are coming very few in time. And it's wonderful to be able to do that.
Yes, it is.
And I challenge you to do that more with other folks, as well as I will do that with other people too.
Well, I thank you for hosting and for kind of being the catalyst and the impetus for this Stories with Sony that I think is going to be a really impactful segment where people can hear the different stories of people inside the city, outside the city, all over, that can hear their stories. And I think there's some great stories to be told.
Yes, it's going to be exciting, and I'm grateful, and I want to thank you for being a part of this and joining us for the ride, and hopefully we'll become long-term friends, and we'll be able to do this with other folks and have more people and more stories to share of our Lincolnites.
Yes.
This is going to be great.
Excellent.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in on today's episode with Lincoln Stories with Sony. It was a pretty amazing interview with Mr. TJ McDowell, very powerful and very intelligent and very impactful community leader here that we have. We're very grateful to have an individual like that to be able to share the message of inclusion and equity and diversity, and that it's a wonderful thing to be able to cherish and experience. And so hopefully you'll tune in again on our next episode with Lincoln Stories with Sony, and we'll bring you another Lincolnite here in town to be able to share their wonderful experience of our beautiful city. Thank you for watching.